Welcome back to another episode of Mastering Master Mode. In this episode, we're going to take a little bit of a break from grinding out bosses, and instead we're going to try our hand at the Old Ones Army. The Old Ones Army is a crossover event with Dungeon Defenders 2, and it's pretty unique. Instead of fighting across the entirety of the world like most events, the Old Ones Army is confined to a fairly limited space. The area that you summon the event is best if it's long and flat. That way there's no terrain in the way when you're trying to take out the enemies. I was hoping that the bridge that I built in my sky across most of the world would be a suitable location to summon the event. However, the bridges don't seem to count as ground, therefore I can't actually summon the event up here. To counter this, I'm going to replace a good portion of these platforms with stone blocks, which should count as ground, and I should be able to summon the event up here and not have to worry about flattening out a huge portion of my world. Unlike other events, in the Old Ones Army, the monsters aren't actually coming to attack you, they're coming to attack the crystal that you place on the stand. Placing down the crystal spawns two portals, one on either side of the crystal, and these portals will spawn the enemies that are trying to attack the crystal. It's my job to defeat each wave of enemies before they can destroy my crystal. Since this is a wave-based event, each wave increases in difficulty until wave 7, which is the last wave of the event. This event is also similar to the solar eclipse event in that it has 3 tiers of difficulty based on how many bosses you have beaten. The first tier is unlocked after reaching hard mode but before beating any of the mechanical bosses. The second tier is reached after killing just one mechanical boss, and the third tier is after defeating Golem, which is our next boss, so currently we're on tier 2. After each wave, there's a bit of a cooldown allowing the player to heal up, place down some more traps, and get ready for the next wave. Unfortunately for me, I don't have any traps yet, since you have to beat the event a couple times to even be able to afford some. I probably should have done this for the first time before defeating a mechanical boss. I probably should have taken on this event before I defeated any of the mechanical bosses, since now I have to take on tier 2 without any traps rather than just tier 1, so it'll be quite a bit harder than if I hadn't waited. I was a little scared that it would be too hard for me to defeat, especially without the traps, but since tier 2 comes after defeating just one mechanical boss, and I've defeated all 3 and Plantera, I'm actually fairly strong against even the second tier. The Shadow Beam Staff is incredible for this event, especially the way I set up the arena. Since it's completely flat, I just have to point in one direction, and the Shadow Beam Staff's projectile will go through all of the enemies and damage them all. One of the only ways I could have made this better is if at the end, behind the portals, I had put up a wall so that the Shadow Beam Staff's projectile would bounce back and hit the enemies a second time. Hindsight's 2020 though, and it doesn't really affect me for now since I'm actually cruising through the second tier a lot easier than I thought I would be. My crystal doesn't even take any damage at all until wave 7, which again is the last wave of the event. The only time I can't just fire straight with the Shadow Beam Staff is when there's a flying enemy, and those aren't too common, honestly. Wave 7 is the first wave that has enemies that can't be taken out within just a few hits of the Shadow Beam Staff. That enemy is the Ogre. The Ogre has almost 13,000 health, and it has a range attack, so you have to be careful of the crystal even from a distance. Luckily, however, the Shadow Beam Staff is still good enough to take it out with minimal damage to the crystal, meaning I'm able to complete the event and get a whole bunch of Defender medals, which is the currency used for the Tavern Keeper, and he's the one who sells the traps for next time. After finishing off the event, I found a couple of mechanical worms stashed away in some of my chests, and I decided why not, let's take on the Destroyer again. I start off the fight using the Spectre Mask, which is the one that deals extra DPS, but about halfway through I decided to switch to the Spectre Hood, which heals me when I deal damage, since I was taking quite a bit. The Shadow Beam Staff is pretty effective at taking out the Destroyer since it's segmented, and I can hit multiple segments of the body with just one shot from the Shadow Beam Staff. While on my way back to the jungle temple, I find another Plantera bulb, and it's actually fairly close to my arena, so I decided why not? Let's take Plantera on again. It was such an easy fight the first time, I might as well just do it again quickly. Unfortunately, I don't have quite as easy of a way back to my arena as I did the first time, since this was an impromptu fight, and because of this, Plantera is actually able to hit me a few times while I'm trying to get her to the arena, since apparently she can shoot through the walls. Once I get her to the arena though, it is easy pickings. Plantera is really not a tough boss at all, especially once you beat her once and you know her patterns. The Spectre mask really helped me out, deal a whole bunch of extra DPS right at the beginning, and then when I get stuck in her jaws, I switch to the hood to heal back up to full and take her out. With Plantera defeated, I'm headed right back into the jungle temple, and this time my goal is to make it all the way to the golem's room at the end of the temple. I also want to make it easier for myself to get there the next time I come, so I'm taking out as many of the spikes and traps as I can along the way. I also end up taking out a whole bunch of the furniture, since with it there, it causes a little bit of visual clutter and makes it harder to see pressure plates, spikes, and enemies. The Spectre mask is huge here, since every enemy that I hit spawns the orbs that deal extra DPS, and there are a ton of enemies. Just shooting straight through a group of enemies spawns a ton of orbs that deal a ton of extra damage to the enemies. I'm making my way through the temple as quickly but safely as possible. Getting hit by a trap is the last thing I want, since every trap in here deals so much damage. Getting hit by even just one trap could mean the end of my run through the temple. The sheer amount of enemies inside the temple makes maneuvering it slow and tedious, but with enough patience, I'm able to get through relatively unharmed. I'm stopping whenever I'm low on health and either waiting for my potion cooldown to wear off or just letting myself heal up naturally. I'm also collecting all the items from the chests I see along the way, since they can provide me with some nice items like solar tablet fragments and lizard power cells. The solar tablet fragments can be crafted into a solar tablet, which spawns the solar eclipse event, which will help farming that event in the future, and the lizard power cells are what are used to spawn golem. I also end up finding a spawner for the Eye of Cthulhu, so I decided why not, let's just take that out real quick. I did it right in the temple, and it took about 3 seconds. The Eye of Cthulhu is an absolute joke at this point. I make it to the final room, which is where you can spawn golem, and it is crawling with enemies. While trying to sort out my inventory, I let a lizard get too close, and it takes me out for my first and only death of this episode right at the very end. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the progress we made and the event that we tried out today. If you did, be sure to drop a like, leave a comment down below, and even subscribe for more DanSquared action. I'll see you all next week for more Mastering Master Mode. Thanks for watching.